Your brain just did something extraordinary. In the last 3 seconds while you were listening to these words, an invisible neural network fired up, a network Louise Hay stumbled upon by accident, and it forever changed how we understand the power of first impressions. Because there's a code, a neural code your brain transmits in the first 7 seconds of any encounter, and the other person's brain can't resist that signal. But here's the catch. 99% of people have no idea they're transmitting this code, let alone how to control it. Louise Hay was 43 when she discovered this, not in a lab, not at a university, but in a dentist's waiting room, observing something no one else had noticed. She realized that whenever a specific person entered the room, something shifted. The entire atmosphere transformed. It wasn't the clothes. It wasn't the appearance. It was something deeper. It was as if that person's brain was sending out a signal all the other brains in the room picked up instantly, without awareness, without choice. And that's when Louise asked herself a question that would change everything. What if we could decipher this code? For the next 7 years, she studied thousands of first impressions and discovered something neuroscience would only confirm decades later. Your brain makes decisions about other people in exactly 7 seconds, decisions that rarely change, decisions based on neural signals you are sending, but probably don't even know about. Think about the last time you walked into a room full of people, or the last time you met someone new. In those first 7 seconds, that person's brain had already categorized you. They'd already decided if you were interesting or ignorable, attractive or invisible, trustworthy or suspicious. And here's the scariest part. If this decision happens before you even open your mouth, Louise called it the neural window, a 7-second window that opens every time you meet someone new, and in that window, your brain transmits a code that determines whether the other person will be drawn to you or simply forget you ever met. But there's more. Louise discovered that some people can manipulate this code. People who seem to have a natural magnetism, who walk into any room and automatically become the center of attention. You know these people. Maybe you even envy these people. They're not necessarily more beautiful, they're not necessarily more intelligent, but something in their neural code is different. Something that makes all the surrounding brains respond in an almost hypnotic way. And Louise realized this wasn't luck. It wasn't natural talent. It was technique. A technique anyone could learn. The first element of this neural code is something she called unconscious anchoring. In the first 2 seconds of any encounter, your brain anchors an emotion onto the person you're meeting. And that emotional anchor determines how they will feel whenever they think of you. Most people anchor anxiety, or insecurity, or fear of judgment, and that contaminates the entire interaction. But the people who master the neural code do the opposite. They manage to anchor curiosity, fascination, a feeling that something interesting is about to happen. Louise tested this hundreds of times. She'd go to social events and deliberately change the code her brain was transmitting, and the results were as unsettling. Because when you change the code, you change how people respond to you, not just in the first impression, but in all future interactions. The second element of the code is even more powerful. Louise discovered that there's a specific neural frequency, a frequency that makes the other person's brain feel like you've known each other for years. She called this familiarity resonance. And it happens when your brain emits signals that mimic neural patterns associated with people who are already important in the other person's life. That's why some people seem familiar even when you meet them for the first time. It's not intuition, it's neuroscience. Their brain is transmitting a frequency that resonates with positive memories you have of other people, and this creates an instant feeling of trust and connection. But here's what Louise discovered that goes against everything you probably believe about first impressions. It's not about being charismatic. It's not about being funny. It's not about impressing the other person. It's about making the other person's brain feel safe, acknowledged, like you're an improved version of someone they already love. And this happens on a completely unconscious level. The third element of the neural code is the most controversial. Louise discovered that there are specific micro-expressions, expressions so subtle that the conscious mind can't detect them, but that the primitive brain recognizes instantly. They are expressions that communicate dominance without aggression, interest without need, confidence without arrogance. She studied actors, politicians, people who needed to win over audiences in seconds. And she found patterns that repeated themselves in everyone who had that natural magnetism. But then Louise made a discovery that changed everything. She realized that the most magnetic people weren't trying to impress anyone. In fact, they were doing the exact opposite. They were making other people feel interesting. There's a fundamental neural difference between trying to be interesting and making someone feel interesting, and that difference determines whether you'll be remembered or forgotten. When you try to be interesting, your brain emits signals of insecurity, signals that communicate that you need the other person's approval, and that activates the defense systems in their brain. But when you make someone feel interesting, you activate the pleasure centers in that person's brain. You become associated with positive feelings, and that creates an almost irresistible magnetic attraction. Louise tested this discovery in a way that surprised even herself. For 6 months, she frequented the same places, met the same people, but deliberately changed the neural code she was transmitting. In the first 3 months, she focused on trying to be impressive. She told interesting stories. She made jokes. She tried to show how intelligent and successful she was. People liked her, but nobody remembered her. In the next 3 months, she changed her strategy. Instead of trying to be interesting, she focused on making other people feel fascinating. She asked questions that made people reflect on themselves in new ways. She gave feedback that made them feel smarter than they actually were. She created moments where people felt special, and the results were dramatic. People who barely remembered her in the first 3 months were now actively seeking her company. They associated Louise with an improved version of themselves, and this created a subtle but powerful emotional dependency. But Louise's most disturbing discovery was yet to come. She realized this neural code didn't just work in casual encounters. It worked in job interviews, in romantic relationships, in important negotiations, because the human brain is primitive. And as much as we try to be rational, our most important decisions are made by this primitive part of the brain, this part that responds to neural codes we barely understand. Louise began teaching these techniques to other people, and the results were consistent. People who were previously ignored suddenly became magnetic. People who struggled to make connections now had to deal with the problem of being sought after too much. But then, something unexpected happened. Louise realized that mastering the neural code changed not only how other people saw her, it changed how she saw herself. Because when you know you can influence how people respond to you, you stop being afraid of rejection. You stop taking people's reactions personally. You understand it's just neuroscience, and this understanding creates a confidence that is almost magnetic. The fourth element of the neural code is the most subtle, and perhaps the most powerful. Louise discovered that there's a difference between occupying space and commanding space. Most people try to occupy space physically. They speak louder. They move more. They try to appear bigger. But people who master the neural code do something different. They command space energetically. They create a presence that fills an entire room without apparent effort, a presence that makes other people naturally gravitate toward them. And this happens because their brains emit a specific frequency, a frequency that communicates calm and control, a frequency that makes other people feel more relaxed and focused when they're around. Louise called this a neural magnetic field, and she discovered that anyone can learn to create it. But then she made a connection that completely changed her understanding of the neural code. She realized that the most magnetic people weren't just transmitting different signals, they were receiving different signals too. They could read the neural code of other people, and this gave them an incredible advantage in any interaction. Because when you can read the code that someone's brain is transmitting, you know exactly how that person wants to be treated. You know which emotional buttons to push. And you know how to make them feel seen and understood in a way they rarely experience. It's almost like having social superpowers. And Louise discovered that these superpowers can be developed. They can be trained, at any age, in any situation. But here's what she never imagined she would discover. The neural code didn't just work in one direction. Louise realized that when you master the transmission of the code, something extraordinary happens. You automatically become more sensitive to the codes that other people are transmitting. It's as if your neural antenna becomes more refined, more precise. And this completely changed the game, because suddenly, Louise could enter any environment and immediately identify who was feeling insecure, who was faking confidence, who was desperate for attention, and who really had power in the room. She could see through the masks people wear, straight to the neural codes they were really transmitting. And with that information, she could adapt her own code in real time. If someone was transmitting insecurity, Louise would adjust her code to transmit stability. If someone was transmitting aggressive dominance, she would transmit calm confidence. If someone was feeling invisible, she would transmit genuine recognition. It was like having an instruction manual for the brain of every person she met. But then Louise made a discovery that left her uncomfortable. She realized she was becoming addicted to this power. Because when you can influence how anyone responds to you, it's hard to resist the temptation to use that power, even when you know you shouldn't. Louise began to question her own motivations. Was she using the neural code to create genuine connections? Or was she manipulating people to satisfy her own ego? And that's when she made the most important discovery of all. The most powerful neural code isn't about influencing other people. It's about becoming genuinely interested in them. Because when you are genuinely curious about someone, your brain automatically transmits the most attractive code possible, not because you're trying, but because genuine curiosity activates the neural networks associated with fascination and discovery, and these networks create a natural magnetic field. Louise tested this theory in a radical way. For 30 days, she stopped trying to use any neural code techniques. Instead, she focused on only one thing: becoming genuinely curious about every person she met. She wanted to understand what made each person unique. What were their secret fears, their unrealized dreams, their hidden passions? And something magical happened. People started opening up to Louise in ways she had never experienced. They shared secrets, vulnerabilities, dreams they had never told anyone. And Louise realized this happened because her neural code had fundamentally changed. Instead of transmitting "find me interesting," she was transmitting "I find you fascinating." And this subtle shift created instant chemistry with anyone. Because everyone wants to feel fascinating. Everyone wants to feel seen, understood, valued. And when you can make someone feel that way in the first 7 seconds, you create an impression that lasts forever. But Louise discovered that there's a fifth element of the neural code, an element that most people never develop because it requires genuine vulnerability. She called it neural transparency. It's the ability to transmit authenticity even when you're nervous, even when you don't know what to say, even when you feel out of place. Most people try to hide these insecurities. They create neural masks, fake codes that try to project perfection. But Louise discovered that the human brain can detect these false codes instantaneously, and when it detects falsity, it automatically activates defense systems. People who master neural transparency do the opposite. They manage to be vulnerable without being needy, human without being weak, imperfect without being problematic. And this creates a neural connection that's almost irresistible, because when someone transmits genuine transparency, it gives other people permission to be vulnerable too. And shared vulnerability creates neural bonds that can last for decades. Louise began teaching this concept of neural transparency, and she discovered that it was the most difficult element for people to master, because it requires you to stop trying to control how people see you and start accepting that being imperfect is actually more attractive than being perfect. But then Louise made an observation that completely changed how she understood human relationships. She realized that the most magnetic people she knew had something in common. They weren't trying to be loved by everyone. In fact, they were selective. They transmitted a neural code that communicated, "I'm interesting to the right people, and that's enough." Louise called this the neural exclusivity code. It's a code that communicates value without arrogance, high standards without judgment, selectivity without rejection. And this code attracts high-quality people like a magnet, because when you transmit that, you don't need everyone's approval. You become more desirable to any specific person. It's a neural paradox. The less you need someone, the more that person wants to be around you. Louise tested this in professional contexts, in romantic relationships, in friendships, and the results were consistent. People who transmitted neural exclusivity attracted better opportunities, deeper relationships, more meaningful connections. But here's what Louise discovered that goes against all conventional wisdom about networking and relationships. The most powerful neural code isn't about attracting more people. It's about attracting the right people. And to attract the right people, you need to be willing to repel the wrong people. This means transmitting clear standards, non-negotiable values, healthy boundaries. And yes, this means that some people aren't going to like you. Some people are going to find you intimidating, or distant, or difficult. But Louise discovered that this is a feature, not a bug, because when you repel the wrong people, you create space for the right people, and the right people create a quality of life that's worth more than 1,000 superficial connections. The sixth element of the neural code is about emotional energy. Louise discovered that everyone carries an energetic signature, a specific emotional frequency that they transmit to everyone around them. Most people transmit anxiety, or neediness, or fear of not being enough, and these frequencies are energetically expensive. When you're around someone who transmits anxiety, you feel drained. When you're around someone who transmits neediness, you feel suffocated. But people who master the neural code transmit the opposite. They transmit calm, security, a sense that everything is going to be okay, and this makes other people feel energized when they're around. Louise called this energetic magnetism, and she discovered that it's possible to develop this capacity deliberately. It's about learning to regulate your own emotional state, not just for your own well-being, but as a gift to everyone you meet. Because when you transmit emotional stability, you become a refuge and a safe place, someone people seek out when they need to feel centered. And this creates a kind of attraction that goes far beyond first impressions. But then Louise made a discovery that surprised her. She realized that the neural code didn't just work between humans, it worked in groups too. When you walk into a room full of people, there's a collective neural code being transmitted, an emotional frequency that defines the vibe of the room. And people who master the neural code can influence this collective frequency. They can walk into a tense environment and immediately make it more relaxed. They can walk into a discouraged group and raise the energy. They can transform any group dynamic simply with their presence. Louise tested this in corporate meetings, in parties, in family events. And she discovered that when you can influence the neural code of a group, you automatically become someone people want to be around, because you become associated with positive experiences, with moments where everything flowed better, with memories where people felt more like themselves. But Louise's deepest discovery was still to come. She realized that mastering the neural code wasn't just about influencing other people. It was about discovering who you really were beneath all the social masks you had built. Because when you stop trying to impress people, you finally get to be yourself. And when you are genuinely yourself, you transmit a neural code that is unique, unrepeatable, impossible to imitate. And it's this authentic neural code that creates the deepest connections, the most meaningful relationships, the most extraordinary opportunities. Louise realized that she had spent years trying to be the version of herself that she thought other people wanted, and that created confused neural codes, inconsistent, inauthentic. But when she finally had the courage to transmit her true neural code, her life changed in ways she could never have imagined. The right people started to naturally gravitate towards her. Opportunities she didn't even know existed started to appear. Relationships she always wanted but never managed to create suddenly became possible, and it was all because she stopped trying to be who she thought she should be and started transmitting who she really was. But then Louise made a final connection, a connection that completely changed how she viewed the purpose of the neural code. She realized that the goal wasn't to have power over other people. The goal was to have the freedom to be yourself. Because when you master the neural code, you stop being afraid of rejection. You stop taking people's reactions personally. You understand that most human interactions are just neuroscience, and that understanding frees you to make choices based on what you really want. It's not about what you think will impress others. It's about something far deeper. Louise Hay spent the last years of her life teaching this, not the techniques, but the liberation. The liberation of being genuinely yourself in a world that constantly tries to convince you to be someone else. And she discovered that when you transmit genuine authenticity, you don't need techniques, you don't need strategies, you don't need to try, because authenticity is the most powerful neural code there is. It's the code that attracts the right people, repels the wrong ones, and creates a life that is truly yours. So maybe the question isn't, how can I make people like me? Maybe the question is, how can I have the courage to be who I truly am? Because when you answer that question, the neural code resolves itself, and you discover you always had the power to create the first impressions you desired. You just needed the courage to transmit your own code, the neural code that was always there, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be transmitted, waiting to change everything in exactly 7 seconds,